Hi there. There was an interesting article in IGN at the beginning of the week interviewing the prosthetic makeup team behind Amazon's new Lord of the Rings Second Age prequel series, Lord of the Rings of Power. And they had three big points I'm going to go over. All of them I was genuinely pleased with. First was, yes, they are going back to prosthetic makeup. They're not using CGI orcs anymore. And I generally like the Hobbit movies. They had flaws, and one of them was, like any CGI you use is going to get dated in a few years. People get too ambitious with it. Versus the full prosthetic makeup they used in the Lord of the Rings trilogy still holds up, because it's real. So they said, we're going back to prosthetics, and here's some preview images. I'm going to show them throughout the video here. This is what they look like. These look like they could have come out of Lord of the Rings, the original trilogy. That's good. That's point one. And I don't want to dwell on that too much. Just hooray, the prosthetics. This looks really nice. Other 2 points are female orcs and some details about where the orcs are in their history at this point in time and how that affected their design. Now, the OneRing.net, which is the big fan site for its book fans who really like the movies and are generally supportive of them, and they have a live stream every Tuesday, Torn Tuesday. I dropped in the live chat, just text-based, but I kept texting things that they thought they really liked. So, I'm going to link to it because they read off things I say 3 or 4 times, because I've read the Silmarillion, I know what I'm talking about, and I'm cracking jokes about it. But they also, because it's more informative, but that's a full hour long. I want this to be shorter to just give you the general points. Are there female orcs in the world of Middle-earth? Unequivocally, yes. Tolkien said there were. But he only said it in passing, that it's just a passing mention that orcs breed after the manner of elves and men. So there must be female orcs, because that's generally, broadly speaking, what they do. And as Wondering.net pointed out, this has been in their Q&A since the late 90s. That was one of the top Q&A things among fandom, Balrogs have wings. Unequivocally, yes, they do. But apart from that, are there female orcs and stuff? Well, yeah, we just don't see them because they're, in the mountains or something. Now, I'm trying to keep this simple for the movie-only crowd, because I was really surprised that a lot of people either hadn't even read the Lord of the Rings trilogy, or a lot of people read the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit, but then don't go on to read the Silmarillion about the First Age, which explains the creation of the orcs. So, major channels who I've seen, people I respect, are going, how can Galadriel be a warrior in this? She was a queen in the Lord of the Rings. And I'm like, yes. Generally in the Silmarillion, they said Galadriel was a warrior in her youth. I mean, it didn't give specific incidents that much, but it said she was of Amazon disposition. OneRing.net has covered this. In Deep Geek has a really good video on Was Galadriel a Warrior? That it's about 10 minutes long. I'm going to link that at the end of this. That's what Galadriel was like. What? Tolkien said that. Just wasn't as detailed, and you're basing this on your knowledge of the movie trilogy. So for a movie-only audience, I don't want you to be confused about this. I generally think that the Lord of the Rings trilogy explained this pretty well. Remember, first movie, Christopher Lee's Saruman, you see him explain this is what the origin of the orcs was like, but now I have created the Uruk-hai. I worry some of you might be confused, but we saw the Uruk-hai being grown in pods underneath Isengard. Well, he explained that orcs are started out as elves that were taken by the dark powers, tortured and mutilated and mutated with dark magic into the orcs. They were elves once. Uruk-hai are separate from the orcs. Uruk-hai are this kind of super orc that Saruman himself has created. He said, and now perfected in my Uruk-hai. And earlier Gandalf says he's hybridized them with men or something. They're lab-grown Frankensteins that are a hybridization of orcs with human DNA, but magically. Saruman has gone full Frankenstein, and he's made the Uruk-hai as orcs infused with human DNA or essence. Some people have wondered, did they rape human women? I don't think it was even that. I get a mental image of someone the mad scientist growing something in his lab. So the fact that they showed Uruk-hai growing in pods because they're unnatural, that didn't bother me because they're genetic constructs. They were made in Saruman's alchemy in his lab. That because they're infused with basically human DNA, even though this is a fantasy thing, they're stronger, taller, and they can handle sunlight better. But that's the Uruk-hai, and they do explain that. Watch it again if you're confused, find the clip, where he says Uruk-hai are not the same thing as orcs. They're like a perfection of the orcs I made by fusing them with human stuff. But he also says very clearly, orcs came from elves. There's some debate in the book fandom because Tolkien himself never quite settled on this, that the print version of the Silmarillion that his son put out in the late 70s says very clearly, orcs were made from elves. But Tolkien was always, worrying about all the fine details, like, well, does that mean they have elf souls? Are they irredeemable? What happens to their soul when they die? So he kept pondering that through the end of his life. He kept rewriting and he kept wavering on, well, are they animals? Are they made from men? What were they made from? I go with the print version of the Silmarillion said they came from elves. The movies weren't wrong to use that. If you're going to pick one answer, they were mutated from elves. It is the functional answer we have. Just asterisk there, footnote. Tolkien kept toying around with that in his mind, but that's the version I think. It fits everything else. And if you're a movie-only person, that's what they say. And because they were made from elves, they reproduce like elves and men do. Short version is this. In the movies, they just said the dark powers. And this is what we're going to see in the Rings of Power prequel. Sauron is the second Dark Lord. The first Dark Lord was Morgoth, who is literally Satan in the mythology of Middle-earth, which Tolkien based very strongly on his Catholic beliefs, that Morgoth is basically Satan. Sauron was basically his right-hand demon, and after Morgoth was defeated at the end of the First Age, he eventually rallies all the other evil creatures like the orcs and stuff and trolls, and resettles in Mordor and turns into a land of evil and starts up again as well. Now I'm the Dark Lord. That it's this whole cosmology thing that because of his Catholic faith in this, Tolkien said that, well, God in Middle-earth is the Judeo-Christian God, but at a time before Christ, because it's thousands of years ago. And he's called Eru Iluvatar by the elves, which means the One, the All-Father, because there's only one of him, he is the Creator. And his Holy Spirit is also called the fire of creation, the Holy Spirit, the secret fire. That when Gandalf says, I am a servant of the secret fire, he's a servant of God, he's a servant of the Holy Spirit. And the day-to-day running of the world is actually handled by a council of archangels, essentially, called the Valar. There's like 14 of them. Morgoth was the 15th one who rebelled against God. He is literally Satan. He's a fallen archangel. There are angels below that called the Maiar, angelic spirits. Sauron is a Maiar, Balrogs are Maiar. Gandalf himself is an angel that has descended into human form, but he's not a man. So, I am an angel, I am a servant of the secret fire, all of that. Morgoth, in his fall, this whole Paradise Lost thing, he was angry that he couldn't create life on his own. That the power of giving life to something belongs with God alone. This is a whole biblical level thing. That evil cannot create. That, the dark side could pervert nature, do something unnatural by creating life, going full Frankenstein with that. No, it's in this, evil cannot create life. All it can do is distort. And one of the big reasons he rebelled is Morgoth wanted to steal the power of creation from the Creator, but he couldn't. It was impossible, because that power belongs to one alone. So because he needed an army, he would capture elves back in the dawn of time, right after their Garden of Eden, basically, at Lake Cuivanen. He would capture elves and eventually, using dark magics, mutated them into the race of orcs. And it was this utter mockery. It was the vilest of his deeds. Literally distorting God's children. It's like biblical level stuff of Satan hating that God loves Adam and Eve so much and that they're his children, that he will twist and defile everything he loves. And it's this act of defiance against the Creator. I'm going to read off a block quote here because it's easier. This is the part of the Silmarillion that explains where orcs come from. Of those unhappy elves who were ensnared by Morgoth, that if you wander too far to the edge of the village at their Garden of Eden, that people would disappear, and this mysterious rider took them, and they figured out later it was Morgoth capturing them to make orcs. Of those unhappy ones who were ensnared by Morgoth, little is known of certainty, for who of the living has descended into the pits of Utumno, hell, or explored the darkness of the councils of Morgoth? Utumno is the high elvish version of that for his original base, for hell, Morgoth's hell. The regular elvish version of that is Udun. So that hell was Udun. So when Gandalf says, I am a servant of the secret fire, the dark fire will not avail you, Balrog, you flame of Udun. The Balrogs were in hell down there with Morgoth, so Utumno, that it's written from the elves' perspective, and their historians go, we weren't there when he was, like magically torturing people in his pits. No one came out of there alive. So we don't know exactly what he did. Who has ever descended into Utumno and lived to tell the tale? Yet it is held true by the wise of elvendom that all those of the elves who came into the hands of Morgoth before hell was destroyed in the First War were put there in prison, and by slow arts of cruelty were corrupted and enslaved. And thus did Melkor breed the hideous race of the Orcs in envy and mockery of the elves, of whom they were afterwards the bitterest foes. For the Orcs had life and multiplied after the manner of elves and men, and naught that had life of its own, nor the semblance of life, could ever Morgoth make since his rebellion against God in the beginning. So say the wise. And deep in their dark hearts the Orcs loathed the master whom they served in fear, the maker only of their misery. This, it may be, was the vilest deed of Morgoth, and the most hateful to God. That this twisted mockery of God's creation, it's a mockery of life by distorting it. And it's funny that when this stuff first came out, when I was saying don't have blind faith in this project, and when the not great teaser came out, everyone was just hating on it. And I haven't seen enough to hate it. I don't want blind faith. I'll judge it as it comes out. I said, so far, nothing has come out that would make me utterly give up on this. It's just, I'm looking forward to it as I would a pleasant video game. When they have like a video game spinoff, it's not going to be as good as the Lord of the Rings trilogy. I don't expect it to be. That it became a meme that people would give this quote that evil cannot create it can only twist and distort, and evil has no life of its own. And that's a riff on this quote here, even though in the very quote it's saying, well, orcs are alive, so logically they have to reproduce, and therefore they would logically be female ones. Because they're not a construct that Morgoth couldn't make life, and life reproduces as normal. So if you're going, oh, there can't be female orcs, like that quote you're using is from the same paragraph that said there must be. They're never mentioned throughout the whole thing. However, other than just a passing mention in this interview, there's some female orc designs we really like. They haven't really said what they're doing with it at all. What is their take on it? So, like, the book fan sites aren't upset about that, yeah, we've been debating that since 25 years ago, and already by the time of the original trilogy, in our Q&A, we concluded it appears there are female orcs. They're just, in their mountain pits and stuff, in the goblin hordes and things we don't come into contact with them doesn't mean they don't exist. So we knew that. That's not a surprise. Just, oh, you're going to actually show that? This isn't an invention as such, but it's still, we have no details on them at all, just other than that, well, logically they must have females they need to reproduce. The only other hint we have is that every time they mention an orc coming into being, like, I curse the day that Azog the orc was born, they don't say born. They don't say hatched. The word that Tolkien consistently uses is spawned. I hate him greatest among all orcs ever spawned. And it goes on like that. So the word they use is spawning. this is going over into headcanon. If people are going to go, oh, they're going to make female orcs, and you see people not taking this seriously, going, oh, what, they're going to be these Xeno-like characters, and just, God, it's not Warcraft, okay? In my personal headcanon, because they say they're spawned and we never see them, do I have anyone in the audience here who read the Dune books? Basically, my mental impression was that female orcs, because they spawn in vast numbers and they never leave their mountain fortresses, I think they're like the Tleilaxu axolotl tanks. These giant sessile breeding vats, essentially, immobilized. Well, that hasn't come out yet because I haven't gotten like the third movie, but popular video game series, Dragon Age. Dragon Age, I think there's a lot of people, fantasy series, a lot of people play this. Tell me in the comments if you play Dragon Age. Where do Darkspawn come from? Darkspawn essentially reproduce using these things called broodmothers, which are technically female, but they're these huge, immobile, giant termite-like breeding vat things, essentially. That it's not, oh, there's going to be a female orc like in Warcraft, World of Warcraft. No. And this is headcanon, they might not do this. My impression was, because they say they spawn in vast numbers, the orcs retreated for a century, but up in the mountains in their tunnels, they spawned like flies. They were so numerous, spawning so quickly, and then they came back. These things must be spawning and just popping out litters. Like when you see a bug just squirting out a stream of little baby crickets or something. This is, again, the whole point of the orcs is Morgoth made them as they're not just ugly because he couldn't make them any better. He intentionally made them as twisted mockeries of the beautiful forms of the elves. Everything about them is a walking parody of the beauty of God's creation. So, like, their language, orcs debase any language they speak, which for Tolkien, as a philologist, was a giant insult, that with these Cockney accents of, oi, governor, I'm going to brush your chimney before I stab that hobbit. They debase every language they speak as an insult to the arts, and they'll topple statues and put ugly heads in place. That their whole purpose is mockery. So it stands to reason, all this is fanon, they haven't done anything. In my mental envisionment of this, that as a mockery of the beauty of the natural birth process, yeah, I think Morgoth would make female orcs as basically immobile breeding vats, just squirting out dozens of little orcs at a time. Like the broodmothers in Dragon Age, or like axolotl tanks from Dune. So there's already people up in arms about, oh, female orcs as characters. Well, Tolkien, other than saying they exist, which, okay, they exist, didn't really describe them much one way or the other. Nor have these people said what exactly their plans for the female orcs are. It might not be some giant, it's a woman just as tough as anything, and would that be wrong? It's not as if just because they didn't say one happened. I realize it sounds like I'm lowballing it of, oh, no, there won't be a female orc warrior, they'll be breeding vats. Don't worry about it. I know that can come off wrong. It's just, we have no idea what they're doing. My headcanon was always, guys, you're getting up in arms about this. I actually think it's going to be a disgusting horror thing that they're breeding vats. Or they could make some interesting warrior character who I'd have to see it to judge it. And I've heard nothing yet, so you're leaping to conclusions is the point of this video. Even if they made one as a character, well, I'd have to see it to judge it. So I'm fine with that. Even one Rignet said, yes, we've always known female orcs existed. We've known that for 25 years. Why are you up in arms about this? And who knows what horrifying form they could take, because there's the breeding vats thing. They could go a couple of ways with this. Third point, I'm just going to read off these interesting things from the article here. I agree with all this, their idea of where are the orcs at this point in time? That in terms of history, Morgoth was defeated at the end of the First Age, and his few surviving evil creatures scattered into the wilderness, And it says this generally in the books, and they just hid in the deep tunnels of the mountains. They hid in the frozen northern wastes. They were basically half feral, and they were scattered and leaderless until centuries later returned from hiding once the coast was clear, once the Watch slept, once the good guys weren't focused on it after so many hundreds of years. Eventually, he came back, rallied them, and in secret they resettled in this new country, Mordor, and rebuilt it as this new base of power. So they're going with that in all their designs. That it says here, we spent a lot of time talking about what would it mean to be an orc in the early Second Age. That compared to Sauron's regimented, obviously terrifying, but kind of regimented army you see in the attack on Minas Tirith in the third movie, compared to that, Sauron hasn't even rallied them yet. That they're closer to like the wild goblins that you see in the Hobbit trilogy. There's different groups of orcs. There's like the more organized warrior ones, and then there's like the hillbilly ones you run into in the mountains who are basically raiders. There's different subtypes. Well, they're all like that, and even worse, actually, they're practically half feral. Says they're wilder, more raw. They're not organized into armies. They're just, almost animals. They're a little more scattered, and they've been scavenging. Totally different time in their history. I agree with all of that. And we saw this the last time I was talking about this, that when I actually went through the Vanity Fair interview they gave the night of the teaser, went, oh, it's actually pretty close to what happened to the books, that the idea is Galadriel is leading the northern armies of Lindon into the northern waste, Faradwaith, to scout out tunnels and frozen caves where orcs might still be hiding. And that their take on it is that Gil-galad is arguing with her, there's so few they'll never be a threat again. We might have even killed them all. You're losing people through ambush and avalanche. There's so few elves survive the first age. We're not getting returns on it. It's diminishing returns that you're sending out these scouting parties and leading them. The risk isn't worth the reward. The orcs have been decimated. They'll never rise again. Or she's accurately pointing out, well, no, and I don't think Gil-galad would be I've talked about this before. I don't think he's stupid for saying that. It's like a zombie apocalypse. We need to focus on building up our infrastructure for the survivors instead of throwing people into scouting missions all the time and hunting missions. We will lose people from attrition. We need to focus on rebuilding, is a valid argument. And for the moment, it looks like they're disorganized and can't do anything. And as the other executive producer summarizes it in the interview, the orcs kind of disappeared for a couple hundred years after Morgoth was defeated, and everyone thought, yay, they've been wiped off of Middle-earth. But really, they regressed into the dark and small little groups. They're hiding in tunnels in the mountains, live in tunnels and sort of under Middle-earth, because the only way they could hide, because they were hunted for so long, that they are really out there. Think of I don't mean to bring up oh, well, the Taliban will never seriously rise up to take all of Afghanistan. We've pushed them on the ropes. Now we can ignore them. We've taken 99% of the country. They'll come back. Or all of these crazy, racist, misogynist people. No, the progress of history is always upwards. There's a small fringe minority that want to take away people's rights and stuff, like Klansmen things that we treat as a joke. We can ignore the neo-Nazis. They'll never rise again. They're a joke. They're nothing. If you ignore a problem for a really long time... I mean, Tolkien's a man who lived through both World Wars. I mean, obviously he's a World War I veteran, but we beat the Germans so low, the evil will never rise again. And the watchful peace that, France wasn't pursuing the demilitarization as much, and the Munich Agreement, all that stuff of just, and man grew complacent and evil came back into the world. That's a big theme, and Tolkien lived through these wars. This happened. He saw this. It's a historical thing. Is it the fate of man to forget? To forget danger and let his guard down? I don't know. But yeah, the orcs, there weren't many of them. They were half feral, hiding in the tunnels of the mountains, and people hadn't seen them in hundreds of years, and there weren't even that many of them left. But Sauron comes back, reorganizes them, and starts, breeding them in mass and building them up into an army and an empire again. So, as he says, concludes, this is them coming back out as they reform under a new so-called leader. And I like the texture detail that one of the prosthetic designers decided on for them. And look at this in the pictures. He said, the way I described them to my team in terms of the look of their skin and stuff, it's a bit like baby versions, in the sense of baby skin, that their skin doesn't look battle damaged yet. That on top of that, they've been living in total darkness and tunnels for a really long time. That these aren't the orc army you see marching into Minas Tirith that's battle-scarred, burned a bit by sunlight and moonlight, so that they look darker from the sun physically burns them, and covered in battle scars and crude medical stuff to nail wood onto where they're missing a piece of something, like on their skull. No, this is logically, well, the wars haven't happened yet for these particular ones, so their skin should be smooth and pale. Pale because they've been living underground. And he says, go to the other films, that they're not quite battle damaged yet, because that's yet to come. And there's still some wrinkles and lines and shape to it. They don't look like undifferentiated tissue. It's just, they're newer. Logically, they would look like that. Not as battle-worn. And I love that he thought out the detail of this, this is what orcs who have been hiding in the mountains for hundreds of years, not fighting other people, but just focused on hiding, that's what they'd look like. So I'm really liking the thought that at least the design team, but the design team always puts a lot of thought into their work, sometimes more than the writers. But I like the thought that went into this, that they're actually paying attention to this is where a book fan would say, yeah, that's pretty much where they are at this point. They're practically feral, they're hiding in tunnels in the mountains. All good stuff. So I'm actually really encouraged by this. And thankfully, even the OneRing.net said everyone really loved this interview and the pictures that came with it, that these look like really good orc prosthetics that we haven't seen since the original trilogy. Female orcs, we don't have a problem with that in general principle, because Tolkien said that. It's just, well, what is their specific take on it? Remains to be seen, and I'll judge it when I see it. And just the other thought, that they are not the regimented, battle-hardened, battle-scarred army of Sauron that hits Minas Tirith. This is before all of that. And it's subtle. It's not even like hitting you over the head with this. Yeah, just in terms of texture and coloration, they'd look a little different. They'd look like these guys who live up in the mountains. So I'm excited for this. I haven't seen many articles I felt like commenting on the past month. It is weird how little they're promoting this, even this late into the year. It's already late June. But this is mostly a Game of Thrones channel, but I guess I've read all this. I read this similarly in the late 90s. I love all of this, and I'm just rambling off the top of my head here. I could crank out a video that was decently explaining what happened in about half an hour. So, some of these people really deep diving this were going into, histories of Middle-earth stuff, and, I appreciate the 2-hour deep dives, but I wanted this to be a reasonably sized video for someone who is only familiar with the movies. I am encouraged by this. So what do you guys think of all this? What did you know there were female orcs, according to Tolkien? Do they breed like elves and men do? Did you know that? And if you did, what did you picture them as? My mental picture was basically breeding vats as a mockery of the natural life process. Because I've read Dune, so I always thought they were like the axolotl tanks, or like Dragon Age's brood mothers or something. Do you have a different take on what the female orcs would be like? Now that you've heard and heard my explanation, do you think that's a reasonable conclusion? Would you want to do it? Because this would be horrifying if I was doing it. I'm talking like how Peter Jackson used to do horror stuff before he did Lord of the Rings. I'm talking full-on body horror with these things. And you might get, that's a little too much. Throw in more. This is horror, and we're having fun with it. So you'll see with that. So I'm interested to see where they're going with this.